The crystal chandeliers of the Al Rashid Hotel's grand ballroom sparkled like stars against the Dubai skyline, their light dancing across the faces of the city's elite. Sheikh Karim Al Rashid stood at the center of it all, yet felt completely alone. At 32, he was the heir to one of the most prestigious hotel empires in the Middle East, but tonight's charity gala felt like just another reminder of the hollow existence he led. "Your Highness, the Minister of Tourism would like a word." His assistant, Hassan, whispered in his ear. Karim nodded mechanically, plastering on the practiced smile he had perfected over years of such events. As he made his way across the ballroom, he caught his reflection in one of the floor-to-ceiling windows. Immaculate in his traditional white kandura, every detail of his appearance carefully curated to meet the expectations of his position. The conversation with the minister passed in a blur of pleasantries and business discussions. Karim played his part perfectly, as always, but his mind wandered to the conversation he'd had with his father earlier that day. "It's time you took more responsibility for the family legacy," Sheikh Ahmad had said, his voice carrying the weight of generations. "The board expects an announcement about your increased role in the company within the month." The pressure was mounting. At 32, Karim was expected not only to take over the hotel empire, but also to have started a family of his own. The parade of suitable matches presented to him had become an endless stream of strategic alliances rather than genuine connections. Later that night, in the solitude of his penthouse suite overlooking the Dubai Marina, Karim stood on his private balcony. The city sprawled before him like a glittering carpet of lights, each one representing a life, a story, a dream. Below, people moved about their lives with a freedom he envied. They could walk into a cafe without causing a stir, fall in love, without considering political implications, live without the weight of centuries of expectations on their shoulders. The next morning, seeking escape from another day of meetings and obligations, Karim decided to visit Zabil Park. He dismissed his security detail, insisting on a rare moment of solitude. As he walked along the carefully manicured paths, he noticed her for the first time. She moved with an unhurried grace, carrying a worn leather bag and wearing a simple abaya that somehow seemed more elegant than all the designer clothes he'd seen at last night's gala. What caught his attention wasn't her physical beauty, though she possessed that in abundance, but rather the way she stopped to help a child who had dropped his ice cream, purchasing a new one without hesitation despite her clearly modest means. Karim found himself returning to the park the next day and the next, watching as she passed by at the same time each morning. He learned her routine. She would stop at the small tea vendor's cart, sometimes sharing a brief conversation with the elderly seller, often leaving him with a few extra dirhams or a small bag of dates. The idea came to him suddenly, born of desperation and a lifetime of watching from behind the walls of privilege. The old tea vendor was retiring. Karim had overheard him mentioning it to one of his regular customers. With a few discreet inquiries and generous compensation, he arranged to take over the man's spot in the park. The transformation required careful planning. He studied the art of traditional tea preparation, practiced affecting a slight accent different from his usual refined tones, and acquired the simple clothes that would allow him to blend in with the other vendors in the park. His closest friend and confidant, Ahmed, thought he had lost his mind. "This is insanity, Karim," Ahmed had protested when he shared his plan. "You're the heir to the Al Rashid Empire, not some character in a romantic novel." What happens when she discovers the truth? But Karim couldn't let go of the possibility that, for once in his life, someone might see him for who he was, rather than what he represented. He had watched her kindness, her genuine interactions with everyone she met, and something in him yearned to experience that authenticity firsthand. On his first morning as the new tea vendor, Karim's hands trembled slightly as he set up his cart. He had chosen a spot near the path she always took, arranging his cups and thermoses with care. The morning crowd began to trickle in. Early joggers, parents with children heading to school, office workers taking shortcuts through the park. Then he saw her approaching, her familiar leather bag slung over her shoulder. His heart raced as she drew closer, and for a moment he feared she would walk past without stopping. But she paused, just as she had done with the previous vendor, and smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Sabah al-Khair," she greeted him. "You're new here?" "Naam," he replied, careful to maintain his assumed persona. "I've taken over for Abu Mahmoud. Would you like some tea?" She nodded, and as he prepared her cup with slightly shaking hands, she introduced herself. "I'm Amira," she said. "I teach Arabic at the community center nearby." "Omar," he replied, giving her the name he had chosen for his new identity. As he handed her the steaming cup, their fingers brushed briefly, and Karim felt an electric jolt of connection that both thrilled and terrified him. Little did he know that this simple interaction would be the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about love, privilege, and the true meaning of wealth. As Amira left with her tea, occasionally glancing back at the new vendor with curious eyes, Karim realized there would be no turning back from the path he had chosen. Amira hurried through the morning crowd at the Al Wasl Plaza metro station, clutching her worn leather bag close. Inside, carefully wrapped in cloth, sat the lunch she had prepared for her mother. Traditional machbouz with extra spices, just the way Mama liked it. The aroma brought back memories of watching her mother cook in the grand kitchens of the Al Rashid Royal Hotel before everything changed. The tiny cafe where she worked, Al Kamar, was already bustling when she arrived. Her colleague Fatima greeted her with a warm embrace and knowing smile. "Your admirer is here again," she whispered, nodding toward the corner table where Saeed, a successful businessman and regular customer, sat with his laptop. "He's just a customer, Fatima," Amira replied, though she couldn't help noticing how his eyes followed her as she moved behind the counter to don her apron. Saeed had been coming to the cafe more frequently over the past few weeks, always requesting to be served by her, leaving generous tips that helped with her mother's medical expenses. As she prepared his usual order, Turkish coffee with cardamom and a slice of date cake, her mind wandered to the new tea vendor in Zabil Park. There was something different about him, something she couldn't quite place. His hands, though they worked competently with the tea equipment, seemed unused to manual labor. And his eyes, they held a depth of intelligence and curiosity that seemed at odds with his simple appearance. "Your coffee, sir," she said, placing Saeed's order before him. He caught her hand gently before she could withdraw it. "Please call me Saeed," he insisted. "I've been meaning to ask you, would you consider giving me private Arabic lessons? I've heard you're an excellent teacher." Amira hesitated. The extra income would be welcome, especially with her mother's medical bills, but something about Saeed's intense interest made her uncomfortable. Before she could respond, the cafe door chimed and a group of tourists entered, giving her an excuse to politely withdraw. During her lunch break, Amira rushed to the small apartment she shared with her mother. She found Mama sitting by the window, her prayer beads moving slowly through her fingers as she gazed out at the city skyline dominated by the Burj Khalifa. "I brought your favorite," Amira said, setting out the lunch she had prepared. Her mother's face lit up, though the smile didn't quite hide the fatigue in her eyes. "You work too hard, Habibi," Mama said, reaching for her daughter's hand. "Just like your father, Allah yarhamu." She paused, her expression growing distant. "I saw the Al Rashid Hotel on television last night. They're hosting that big charity gala. Remember when I used to prepare the desserts for such events?" Amira squeezed her mother's hand. She remembered all too well. For 15 years, her mother had been the head pastry chef at the Al Rashid Royal Hotel until that terrible day when she was suddenly dismissed, accused of sharing secret recipes with a competitor. The stress and shame of the false accusation had contributed to her declining health, and though they had tried to fight the dismissal, they couldn't afford to go up against the powerful Al Rashid family. "We have each other, Mama," Amira said, firmly. "That's all that matters." Later that afternoon, as she walked through Zabil Park on her way to teach at the community center, Amira found herself approaching the tea vendor's cart again. Omar, as he had introduced himself, was serving an elderly couple, his movements careful and deliberate. When he noticed her, his whole face transformed with a smile that made her heart skip unexpectedly. "The usual?" he asked, already reaching for her preferred cup. "You remembered," she said, surprised and touched by the gesture. "How could I forget?" he replied, then added hastily, "You're one of the few customers who actually takes the time to talk to me." As he prepared her tea, she noticed a book partially hidden beneath his cart, a volume of classical Arabic poetry she used in her advanced classes. Their eyes met as she recognized it, and for a moment something passed between them, a spark of connection that transcended their apparent differences. "You enjoy poetry?" she asked, gesturing to the book. A flash of panic crossed his face before he composed himself. "I try to improve myself when business is slow," he said carefully. "Perhaps you could recommend some readings, being a teacher?" Their conversation flowed easily after that, moving from poetry to philosophy, and Amira found herself sharing stories about her students at the community center. Omar listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions that revealed a depth of education that puzzled her. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, Amira realized she had been talking with Omar for nearly an hour. "I should go," she said reluctantly. "My mother will be waiting." "Tomorrow then?" Omar asked, his voice holding a note of hope that resonated with something deep within her. "Tomorrow," she agreed, turning to leave but glancing back one last time to find him still watching her, his expression unguarded and full of longing. That night, as Amira helped her mother prepare for bed, her thoughts kept returning to the mysterious tea vendor. There was something about him that didn't quite add up, yet she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. In him, she sensed a kindred spirit, someone who, like her, might understand what it meant to live between worlds, to dream of something more while remaining true to one's values. Little did she know that across the city, in a luxurious penthouse high above the glittering lights of Dubai, Sheikh Karim al-Rashid was thinking of her too, wondering how long he could maintain his charade, and whether the truth, when it inevitably came out, would shatter the precious connection they were beginning to forge. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the Al-Rashid Group's executive offices as Karim rushed through another board meeting. His mind wandered to the small tea cart waiting to be set up in Zabil Park, even as his father's voice droned on about expansion plans and profit margins. "Karim, are you listening?" Sheikh Ahmed's sharp tone cut through his reverie. "The Beijing development cannot wait. The investors expect you to fly out next week for the final negotiations." Karim straightened in his chair, his heart sinking. A week away from Dubai meant a week away from the park, from Amira. "Father, perhaps we could delegate the initial meetings to the development team. My presence here is crucial for other ongoing projects." Hassan, his assistant, shot him a questioning look. It wasn't like Karim to avoid international travel. In fact, he usually welcomed it as an escape from the suffocating pressures of Dubai's social scene. Sheikh Ahmad's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded. "Very well, but I expect you to take a more active role in these negotiations soon. You cannot avoid your responsibilities forever." The meeting concluded, and Karim hurried to his private elevator, where Ahmed waited with the simple clothes he now wore as Omar the tea vendor. "Your father is growing suspicious," Ahmed warned, as Karim changed in the secure basement level where he kept his modest vehicle. "And Hassan has been asking questions about your morning disappearances." "I'll handle it," Karim replied, though uncertainty gnawed at him. The past 3 weeks of mornings in the park with Amira had become the only real thing in his increasingly complicated life of deception. At the park, Amira's visits had grown longer, their conversations deeper. She would bring him books of poetry to discuss, and he had to constantly guard against revealing too much of his education. Yesterday, she had brought him homemade date cookies, the gesture touching him more deeply than any of the expensive gifts he regularly received as Sheikh Karim. As if summoned by his thoughts, Amira appeared on the path, but today she wasn't. Alone. Karim's chest tightened as he recognized Saeed walking beside her, carrying her bag despite her obvious discomfort with the gesture. "Good morning, Omar," Amira called out, relief evident in her voice as she quickened her pace toward his cart. "The usual, please." Saeed's expensive suit and aristocratic bearing seemed out of place in the morning crowd of workers and families. He regarded the tea cart with barely disguised disdain. "Amira, You really should try the new cafe at the Dubai Mall. They import their tea directly from the finest estates in Ceylon. I prefer Omar's tea, she replied firmly. It reminds me of how my mother used to make it. She turned to Karim with a warm smile. Speaking of Mama, the treatment seems to be helping. The doctor says her strength is improving. Karim's heart swelled. The anonymous donation he had arranged through his foundation to cover her mother's medical expenses had been worth every careful precaution to keep his involvement hidden. That's wonderful news, he said softly. Saeed cleared his throat impatiently. About those private lessons we discussed, Amira, I've prepared a very generous offer. He pulled out an envelope from his jacket pocket. Your expertise is worth every dirham. Karim's hands stilled over the tea preparations as he waited for her response. He had seen the way Saeed looked at her at the cafe, had heard through his network about the businessman's reputation for pursuing beautiful women from humble backgrounds, offering them a glimpse of luxury before moving on to his next conquest. I've told you before, Mr. Saeed, I'm fully booked with my current students, Amira replied diplomatically. Perhaps one of my colleagues at the community center. I'm not interested in your colleagues, Saeed interrupted, stepping closer. I'm interested in you. Surely you can make time for someone who could open doors for you. The implied condescension in his tone made Karim's jaw clench. He had witnessed this type of behavior countless times in his social circle, wealthy men who viewed everyone as commodities to be bought. The lady has declined, Karim found himself saying, his assumed accent slipping slightly. Perhaps you should respect her decision. Saeed turned to him with cold fury. Know your place, vendor. This is a private conversation. There is no private conversation, Amira interjected firmly. And Omar is right. I've given you my answer, Mr. Saeed. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have classes to prepare for. She placed a few dirhams on the cart for her tea, deliberately avoiding Saeed's envelope, and walked away with her head held high. Saeed lingered for a moment, his expression darkening as he looked between the tea vendor and Amira's retreating form. You've made a serious mistake, he said quietly to Karim, before turning on his heel and striding away. Karim watched him go, worry settling in his stomach. As Sheikh Karim al-Rashid, he could easily handle any trouble Saeed might cause, but as Omar the tea vendor, he was vulnerable. More importantly, he feared Saeed's wounded pride might lead him to retaliate against Amira's reputation. That afternoon, in his office at Al-Rashid Tower, Karim reviewed everything he could find about Saeed's business dealings. The man had connections throughout Dubai's business community, including several board members of the Al-Rashid Group. One wrong move could not only expose Karim's deception, but also cause problems for Amira. As he stared out at the Dubai skyline, Karim realized his carefully constructed double life was beginning to unravel. The distance between his two worlds was shrinking, and soon he would have to choose, continue living this lie and risk everything, or tell Amira the truth and potentially lose her forever. The aroma of cardamom and coffee filled the small kitchen of Al-Kamar Cafe as Amira prepared for the morning rush. Her mind kept drifting back to yesterday's confrontation in the park, to Omar's unexpected intervention, and the strange intensity in his eyes when he stood up to Saeed. Earth to Amira, Fatima called, waving a hand in front of her face. That's the third time you've refilled the same sugar container. Are you thinking about your tea vendor again? Amira felt her cheeks warm. I'm just worried about Saeed's reaction. He's not used to being refused. Don't worry about him, Fatima said, but her expression was concerned. Though I heard he's quite close with the Al-Rashid family. My cousin works at their hotel, and apparently Saeed is often seen in private meetings with Sheikh Ahmad, the E. Mention of the Al-Rashid family made Amira's stomach twist. She had never told anyone, not even Fatima, about her mother's history with them. The injustice of her mother's dismissal still burned, but lately she'd been hearing whispers of change within the company. Better treatment of workers, new healthcare policies, anonymous donations to community projects. The morning passed in a blur of customers and coffee orders. During a quiet moment, Amira slipped into the back room to call her mother. How are you feeling today, Mama? Much better, Alhamdulillah, her mother replied. The new medications are helping, though I still don't understand how we qualified. For this treatment program, Allah works in mysterious ways. Amira smiled, thinking of the letter they had received from the charitable foundation, offering to cover all medical expenses. It had seemed too good to be true, but the doctors had confirmed everything was legitimate. "Will you visit your tea vendor today?" her mother asked knowingly. "You speak of him often." "Mama," Amira protested, though she couldn't hide her smile. "He's just different. When we talk, I forget about everything else. He listens, really listens, and sometimes the things he says—" "Be careful with your heart, Habibi," her mother warned gently. "Sometimes people are not what they seem." The warning stayed with Amira as she walked through Zabil Park that afternoon. Omar was serving an elderly man, and she noticed again the grace in his movements, the perfect posture that seemed at odds with his supposed background. When he saw her, his entire face lit up in that way that made her heart skip. "I brought something for you," she said, pulling out a book of ancient Bedouin poetry, "to thank you for yesterday." Their fingers brushed as he took the book, and the contact sent a shiver through her. "You shouldn't have to thank me for basic decency," he said softly. Still, it was brave. Saeed is a powerful man. Some things are worth the risk. His eyes held hers, and for a moment Amira felt as though he was trying to tell her something more. They fell into their usual conversation, but today there was a new undertone, an electricity in the air between them. Omar seemed preoccupied, starting sentences only to stop himself, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Tell me about your dreams," he said suddenly. "If you could have anything in the world, what would it be?" Amira considered the question carefully. "I dream of opening my own cafe," she admitted. "Not a fancy place like in the malls, but somewhere that celebrates our culture, our traditions. A place where everyone would feel welcome, regardless of their status." She laughed self-consciously. "Silly, isn't it?" "Not at all," he replied. "Seriously. Dreams are what make us human. They remind us of who we really are beneath all our appearances." A group of schoolchildren ran past, their laughter breaking the moment. Amira glanced at her watch and realized she was late for her teaching session. As she hurried to leave, Omar called after her. "Amira, wait. There's something I need to tell you." She turned back, her heart pounding at the urgency in his voice. But whatever he had been about to say was interrupted by a commotion near the park entrance. A group of official-looking men in suits were moving through the park, inspecting vendor permits. "Tomorrow," Omar said quickly, his expression troubled. "Please come early tomorrow. It's important." That evening, as Amira helped her mother prepare dinner, she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to change. Her mother watched her with knowing eyes as she absent-mindedly stirred the soup. "You're falling in love with him, aren't you?" she asked gently. Amira's hand stilled on the spoon. "I don't know what I'm feeling, Mama. He's unlike anyone I've ever met. Sometimes when we talk, it's as if he knows exactly what I'm thinking. But other times, there's something he's holding back. I can feel it." Her mother was quiet for a long moment. "The heart knows what the eyes cannot see, Habibi. But remember, love built on lies, no matter how well-intentioned, is like a house built on sand." Later that night, unable to sleep, Amira stood at her window, looking out at the glittering Dubai skyline. In the distance, the Al Rashid Royal Hotel rose like a golden beacon against the night sky. Tomorrow, Omar wanted to tell her something important. Her heart fluttered with both anticipation and fear. What she didn't know was that at that very moment, in his penthouse suite, Sheikh Karim al-Rashid was pacing sleeplessly, torn between his growing love for her and the weight of his deception. In his hands, he held the simple book of Bedouin, poetry she had given him, its pages filled with the kind of honest, pure emotion that had been missing from his life until he met her. Both of them stood at the edge of a precipice, knowing that tomorrow would change everything, yet neither fully prepared for the storm that was about to break over their carefully constructed world. The early morning light had barely touched the Dubai skyline when Amira made her way to Zabil Park. Her heart raced with anticipation of Omar's promised conversation, but as she approached his usual spot, She found the tea cart unmanned. Strange. He was always there before sunrise, preparing for the day's first customers. A commotion near the park's central plaza caught her attention. A crowd had gathered, their excited whispers carrying on the morning breeze. As she drew closer, she recognized Saeed's voice rising above the others, sharp with vindictive satisfaction. "Your Highness," he called out loudly, "I believe you've lost something." Amira pushed through the crowd, freezing at the sight before her. There stood Omar, but not Omar. Gone were the simple vendor's clothes, replaced by an immaculate white kandura. His posture had changed, radiating the unmistakable authority of privilege and power. Sheikh Karim al-Rashid stood where her tea vendor had been, surrounded by security personnel and wide-eyed onlookers. "Saeed." Karim's voice was ice-cold, all pretense of his vendor's accent gone. "You overstep." "Do I?" Saeed's smile was cruel. "I merely thought the public should know about their beloved Sheikh's peculiar hobby. Playing at being common, deceiving innocent people." His eyes found Amira in the crowd. "Isn't that right, Miss Amira?" The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet as memories crashed through her mind. Every conversation, every shared laugh, every moment of connection, all built on lies. She felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon her, including his. When she finally met Karim's gaze, the desperate pleading she saw there only twisted the knife deeper. "Amira," he stepped toward her, reaching out. "Please, let me explain." She backed away, bumping into other spectators. "Was any of it real?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper, but in the hushed crowd it carried. "Was anything you told me true?" "Everything that mattered was true," he insisted. "My feeling—" "Your feelings?" The hurt crystallized into anger. "What about my feelings? Did you enjoy it? Watching the poor, simple girl pour out her heart while you played your game?" It wasn't a game. The anguish in his voice sounded genuine, but how could she trust anything about him now? "I just wanted to know what it was like to be seen for. Who I am, not what I am." A bitter laugh escaped her. "Who you are. You're exactly what my mother said about your family. Privileged people who think they can play with others' lives for their own amusement." The color drained from his face. "Your mother, I don't understand." "Fatima," she turned to her friend who had arrived for her morning walk, "tell everyone who my mother is. Tell them about the head pastry chef who was dismissed from the Al Rashid Royal Hotel, accused of stealing recipes she had created herself. Tell them how no other hotel would hire her after your family discredited her." The crowd's murmuring grew louder. Several phones were recording the scene, and Amira could see Hassan, whom she now recognized as Karim's assistant, urgently speaking into his phone. "I didn't know," Karim said softly. "Amira, you have to believe me. I had no idea. Like you, had no idea what it means to struggle, to count every dirham, to watch your parents' health fade because you can't afford proper treatment." The tears she'd been holding back spilled over. "Oh wait, you did know. You were the one behind the mysterious foundation that paid for her treatment, weren't you?" His silence was answer enough. "How dare you?" Her voice shook. "How dare? You play God with our lives? Did it make you feel powerful, watching us gratefully accept your charity while you pretended to be one of us?" "That's not what it was," he protested. But Saeed's laughter cut through the tension. "Oh, this is better than I imagined," he gloated. "The noble sheikh and the vengeful daughter of a disgraced servant. The board will love this scandal." "Be quiet!" Karim and Amira snapped simultaneously, then caught each other's eyes in surprise. Hassan stepped forward, his professional mask firmly in place. "Your Highness, we need to leave. The media is arriving." Indeed, Amira could see news vans pulling up to the park entrance. The morning sun had fully risen now, harsh and unforgiving in its clarity. Just like the truth, she thought bitterly. "Amira, please," Karim tried one last time, "give me a chance to make this right." She looked at him, really looked at him. The man she had grown to care for was there in his eyes, in the way his hand still moved as if reaching for his teacups, in the slight tea stain on his sleeve that seemed so out of place on his pristine kandura. But he was also a stranger, a powerful man who had deceived her, played with her trust, and reopened. Old wounds she thought had healed. "There is nothing to make right, Your Highness," she said formally, drawing her dignity around her like armor. "You wanted to know what it was like to be common. Well, this is it. Having no power, no choice, no voice, congratulations on your excellent research." With that, she turned and walked away, head held high despite the tears streaming down her face. Behind her, she could hear the crowd's excited chatter, the clicks of camera phones, Saeed's satisfied chuckle, and Hassan's urgent whispers about damage control. But above it all, she heard Karim call her name one last time, not as the Sheikh, not as Omar, but as a man watching his world crumble around him. She did not look back. The scandal exploded across Dubai like a sandstorm, impossible to contain, and leaving no corner untouched. Sheikh in disguise trended on social media, with grainy videos of the confrontation in Zabil Park playing on every news channel. Some praised Karim's attempt to understand the common people, while others condemned his deception. Opinions about Amira ranged from sympathy to accusations of entrapment, but she heard none of it, having retreated into the sanctuary of her small apartment with her mother. "You haven't touched your food, Habibi," Mama said softly, watching. Amira pushed the rice around her plate. "You need to eat." "I'm not hungry." Amira had barely eaten in the 3 days since the revelation. "I keep thinking about all the signs I missed. How could I have been so blind?" Her mother reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "Love makes us see what we wish to see, but perhaps there is more to this story than we know." "What more could there be?" "He lied to me, Mama, to us." Amira stood abruptly, moving to the window. "He knew we were struggling with your medical bills, and instead of acknowledging his family's role in our situation, he played the benevolent, secret benefactor." A knock at the door interrupted them. Fatima stood in the hallway, clutching a newspaper. "You need to see this," she said, spreading the paper on the table. The headline read, "Sheikh Karim announces major reforms at Al Rashid Group." Below was a photo of Karim at a press conference, looking exhausted but determined. The article detailed sweeping changes to employee policies, including retroactive compensation for wrongful terminations, comprehensive healthcare coverage, and a review board for worker grievances. "He's also been asking about you at the cafe," Fatima added carefully. "Not directly, but his assistant Hassan came by. They want to make things right with your mother." "We don't want his guilt money," Amira said firmly, but her mother's quiet voice cut through her anger. "The sheikh who dismissed me was his father, not him." Mama's fingers traced the prayer, beads in her lap. "And if what this article says is true, perhaps some good can come from all this pain." Before Amira could respond, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. A video link. With trembling fingers, she pressed play. It was security footage from the Al Rashid Royal Hotel, dated 15 years ago. The image quality was poor, but she could clearly see her mother in the hotel kitchen, confronting a younger Sheikh Ahmad and several board members. The audio was muffled, but one phrase rang clear. "These are my family's recipes passed down through generations. I will not let you claim them as hotel property." The next clip showed Saeed, much younger but unmistakable, speaking privately with Sheikh Ahmad. Though the audio was faint, words like competitor's offer and recipe theft were audible. The final clip showed her mother being escorted out, head held high even in disgrace. A text followed the video. "I found this in the old security archives. Saeed orchestrated everything because my father had promised him a board position in exchange for preventing a competitor from poaching your mother's talents. I can never undo the hurt my family caused, but I can try to make it right. The truth about your mother's dismissal will be made public tomorrow, along with a full apology and reinstatement offer, if she wants it. This isn't about guilt or charity, Amira. It's about justice. Kay." Amira's hands shook as she showed the video to her mother. Mama's eyes filled with tears as she watched her younger self stand up to the powerful men who had wronged her. "All these years," she whispered, "I thought no one would ever know the truth." Another message appeared on Amira's phone. The tea cart in the park was never about playing a role. It was about finding something real in a life full of pretense. "You showed me what it means to live with dignity and authenticity, regardless of circumstances. You taught me that true wealth isn't in what we own, but in how we treat others. I understand if you can never forgive my deception, but please know that every moment we shared, every conversation, every smile, that was the real me. Not the sheikh, not the vendor, just a man learning what it means to truly care for someone. Amira set the phone down, her emotions a storm she couldn't navigate. The truth about her mother's dismissal had been revealed. Justice was finally being served. But the cost had been her heart. "What do you think, Mama?" she asked softly. "About the reinstatement offer?" Her mother was quiet for a long moment, still staring at the frozen image of her younger self on the phone screen. "I think," she said finally, "that Allah works in mysterious ways. Sometimes what looks like an ending is actually a beginning." She looked at her daughter knowingly. "The question is, are you ready to begin again?" Amira turned back to the window, watching the sun set behind the Dubai skyline. Somewhere out there, a man she had known as Omar and now knew as Karim was, trying to bridge the gulf between their worlds. Not with grand gestures or displays of wealth, but with truth, justice, and reform. The tea cart still stood in Zabil Park. She knew. She had seen it on her way to the cafe, now manned by a real vendor. But every morning there was a fresh bouquet of desert roses on the counter, her favorite flowers, though she had only mentioned it once in passing to Omar, to Karim. "I don't know if I can trust him again," she admitted. "Trust, like a garden, in the desert, takes time and patience to grow," her mother said wisely. "But first you must decide if it's worth the effort to plant the seeds." Fatima, who had been quietly watching this exchange, spoke up. "You know, they say the sheikh hasn't been seen at any social events since that day in the park. The gossip at the hotel is that he spends all his time in meetings about the reforms, personally reviewing every case of worker complaints from the past 20 years. Amira closed her eyes, remembering the way Omar, Karim, had listened to her dreams about her cafe, asking questions not just about the business plan, but about her vision for creating a space where everyone would feel welcome, regardless of status. Had that been the sheikh learning about his workers' lives, or had it been the man beneath the title truly understanding her heart? The call to Maghrib prayer echoed across the city, reminding her that even the longest day must end, making way for a new dawn. The question was, what would tomorrow bring? 2 weeks had passed since the revelation in Zabil Park, and Dubai was witnessing an unprecedented transformation. The Al Rashid Group's reforms had sent shockwaves through the business community, with other companies scrambling to follow suit. But for Amira, life continued in its simple routine, or at least she tried to maintain the illusion of normalcy. "Your mother's interview is trending," Fatima announced during a quiet moment at Al-Kamar Cafe. She held up her phone, showing a video of Mama speaking eloquently about her experience and the recent vindication of her name. The comment section overflowed with support and admiration for her dignity and forgiveness. "She's stronger than I am," Amira said softly, wiping down the counter for the 3rd time. "She's already accepted the consulting position they offered her, you know. Part-time, developing new signature desserts for the hotel's restaurants." "And you?" Fatima raised an eyebrow. "Have you read any of his letters?" The stack of unopened envelopes in Amira's bedside drawer seemed to burn in her mind. Each one, hand-delivered, each one bearing the same elegant handwriting. She hadn't opened them, but she couldn't bring herself to throw them away either. "There's nothing left to say," she insisted, but even as the words left her mouth, a commotion outside the cafe caught their attention. A group of workers had gathered on the street, their faces bright with excitement. An older man, whom Amira recognized as one of their regular customers, rushed into the cafe with tears in his eyes. "They're returning our passports," he exclaimed. "The new worker protection program. They're giving us proper contracts, housing allowances, and letting us keep our documents. My family. I can finally bring them here." Similar scenes were playing out across the city. The Al Rashid Group's reforms had sparked a movement, with other companies facing pressure to improve their treatment of workers. What had started as a scandal was becoming a revolution in corporate responsibility. That evening, as Amira helped her mother prepare for her first day back at the hotel's kitchens, she found herself thinking about the man behind these changes. Not Sheikh Karim, but the person she had known as Omar, the man who had listened to her stories about struggling workers with genuine concern, who had remembered every detail she shared about her dreams and fears. "Hassan visited today," her mother said casually, sorting through her old recipe books. "He brought some interesting proposals from the sheikh." Amira stiffened. "More attempts at compensation?" "No, Habibi. Plans for a new cultural center near the hotel. They want to convert one of their unused properties into a space for local artisans and small business owners. There would be a cafe component." Her mother paused meaningfully. "They're looking for someone to manage it, someone with vision and understanding of both traditional and modern Dubai." "Mama, please, I can't accept anything from him." "This isn't a gift, Amira, it's an opportunity. One you would have earned on your own merits if life had been fair. Sometimes pride can be as heavy a chain as poverty." Before Amira could respond, her phone buzzed with a news alert. She nearly dropped it when she saw the headline, "Sheikh Karim challenges business elite. Spend a week in your workers' shoes." The article detailed a bold initiative where corporate leaders would work alongside their employees, experiencing their daily challenges firsthand. Several photos showed Karim, dressed in a maintenance worker's uniform, helping to repair air conditioning units at one of his hotels. There was no publicity team following him, no carefully staged photo ops, just candid shots taken by surprised employees. "He's actually doing it," Amira whispered. "Everything we talked about, really seeing people, understanding their lives. Actions speak louder than words, my dear." Her mother smiled knowingly. "And some men learn to speak through their actions when their words have failed them." Later that night, Amira found herself walking through Zabil Park, drawn to the spot where the tea cart used to stand. The desert roses were there, fresh as always, their delicate petals catching the moonlight. Next to them lay a small book, the same volume of Bedouin poetry she had given to Omar. She picked it up and a loose page fluttered to the ground. It was covered in handwritten notes, thoughts and reflections on various poems. She recognized the handwriting from his unopened letters, but these weren't meant for her. They were private musings, honest and unguarded. One particular passage caught her eye. The poet speaks of seeing beyond the veil of wealth to the poverty of the soul. "I never understood true wealth until I served tea in this park, until I learned that a genuine smile is worth more than all the gold in our vaults. She taught me that authenticity is the real luxury, and now that I've tasted it, I cannot go back to living behind masks." A sound behind her made her turn. Through the gathering dusk, she saw a familiar figure approaching, not in a kandura or vendor's clothes, but in simple Western attire. Karim stopped several feet away, respect and uncertainty mingling in his expression. "I didn't expect to find you here," he said softly. "I didn't expect to come," she admitted. The distance between them felt both vast and insignificant, like the space between stars that only appears empty until you discover all the invisible forces connecting them. "Your mother's recipes are revolutionizing our restaurants," he offered. "She suggested some changes that will make the kitchens more efficient for the staff, things I should have seen years ago." "And you? How are you finding life in the maintenance department?" A genuine smile crossed his face, the same one she had fallen in love with over cups of tea. "Hot, exhausting, humbling, essential." He paused. "I understand now why you always said real change has to come from genuine understanding." Amira touched the poetry book in her hands. "And do you understand why the lies hurt so much?" "Yes," he said simply. "Because they were unnecessary. Because the truth, even with all its complications, would have been better than the best-intentioned deception." The evening call to prayer echoed across the park, and Amira realized she should head home. As she turned to leave, Karim spoke again. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said. "I'm asking for a chance to prove that everything of substance between Gus was real. The man you knew in the park, he wasn't a disguise. He was the person I discovered I could be when I stopped hiding behind titles and expectations." Amira looked at him for a long moment. In the fading light, she could see both Omar and Karim in his features, and for the first time she wondered if they had always been the same person, a man struggling to bridge two worlds. just as she had always dreamed of doing with her cafe. "I can't promise anything," she said finally. "I'm not asking for promises, just possibility." She nodded once, clutching the poetry book to her chest, and walked away. But this time her steps felt less like running and more like the beginning of a new path, one that neither of them could see the end of, but that might be worth exploring, one careful step at a time. The Cultural Center project consumed Amira's thoughts over the next few weeks, despite her initial resistance. The plans Hassan had shared with her mother were more than just a business venture. They represented everything she had dreamed of creating, a space where tradition and modernity could coexist, where people from all walks of life could gather and share their stories. One morning, unable to contain her curiosity any longer, she found herself standing outside the proposed location, an elegant but unused building near the Al Rashid Royal Hotel. To her surprise, she heard familiar voices coming from inside. "The acoustics in this corner would be perfect for the storytelling sessions," Karim was saying, his voice echoing slightly in the empty space. "And the natural light through these windows. We could install traditional Majlis seating here," her mother's voice replied. "Modern comfort with cultural authenticity." Amira stepped into the doorway, and both of them turned to look at her. Her mother's eyes twinkled with knowing satisfaction, while Karim's expression held careful hope. "Mama, what are you doing here?" Amira asked, though she already knew the answer. "Offering my expertise," her mother said innocently. "After all, what's a cultural center without proper attention to traditional cuisine?" She gathered her things with suspicious haste. "But I have a meeting at the hotel. Perhaps you'd like to see the plans they've drawn up." Before Amira could protest, her mother had glided past her, leaving her alone with Karim in the sunlit space. He was dressed simply again, with traces of dust on his clothes suggesting he'd been personally involved in the renovation planning. "Your mother's input has been invaluable," he said, breaking the awkward silence. "She understands exactly what this place could be." Amira walked further into the room, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor. "And what exactly is that?" "A bridge," he replied, "between past and present, tradition and progress, different classes and cultures." He hesitated, then added softly, "All the things you talked about wanting to create in your cafe." She ran her hand along a weathered pillar. "You remember those conversations?" "I remember everything, Amira. Every cup of tea, every story, every dream you shared." He maintained a respectful distance as she explored the space. "This project isn't about making amends. It's about making your vision real, because it's exactly what Dubai needs." Sunlight streamed through the arched windows, creating patterns on the floor that reminded her of the shadows cast by her mother's old latticework screens. "And who would run this place?" she asked, already suspecting the answer. "Someone who understands both worlds, someone with the compassion to make everyone feel welcome, the wisdom to respect tradition while embracing progress, and the courage to stand up for what's right, even to a sheikh." His attempt at humor earned him a small smile. "You're not as funny as you think you are," she said, but there was less edge in her voice than before. "I never was, but you laughed at my jokes anyway." The simple observation hit her unexpectedly hard. She had laughed with him, dreamed with him, shared parts of herself she'd never shared with anyone else, and despite the lies about his identity, those moments had been real. "I've been reading your letters," she admitted. She had finally opened them the night after their encounter in the park. Each one had revealed more of the man she'd known as Omar, the person behind both the vendor's disguise and the sheikh's facade. And I understand better now. Not just why you did it, but why you kept doing it." She turned to face him fully. "It wasn't just about me, was it? It was about finally being free to be yourself." He nodded slowly. "The irony is, pretending to be someone else showed me who I really am, or who I want to be." He gestured around the empty space. "That's what this place could be for others. A chance to be their authentic selves, regardless of where they come from." A comfortable silence fell between them, filled with possibilities. Amira could see it clearly now, the cafe area with its traditional coffee service and modern beverages, the workshop spaces where artisans could practice their crafts, gathering areas where stories could be shared and bridges built. The board approved all the reforms, Karim said quietly. Permanent changes to workers' rights, housing, healthcare. Saeed resigned in protest. His replacement is a former labor rights activist. I heard. The news had been everywhere. You're changing things. We're changing things, he corrected gently. Every change I've implemented came from something. You taught me during our conversations in the park. She raised an eyebrow. I don't recall giving lectures on corporate policy over tea. No, but you taught me to see the humanity in every person, to understand that real wealth isn't in what we own, but in how we treat others. He took a cautious step closer. You showed me what integrity looks like, Amira. Not by preaching about it, but by living it every day. A knock at the door interrupted them. Hassan stood there with a group of contractors looking apologetic. Your Highness, the structural engineers are here for the assessment. Karim nodded, then turned back to Amira. Stay, he said simply. See what this place could become. No pressure, no obligations, just see the possibilities. As he moved to leave, Amira called after him. The cafe area, she said. It needs to have a tea cart. He turned back, hope brightening his features. For authenticity's sake. For truth's sake, she replied. Some of the most authentic conversations in Dubai happened over cups of tea in a park. His smile, the real one, the one that had first touched her heart, lit up his face. I know just the supplier to contact. As Amira watched him walk away with the contractors, she realized something had shifted inside her. The pain of his deception hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something else. An understanding that sometimes the deepest truths can only be discovered through the journey of becoming who we're meant to be. She moved through the space again, this time allowing herself to imagine what it could become. Not just a cultural center, but a testament to the power of authentic connection, a place where masks could be set aside and real relationships could flourish. Like the desert roses that still appeared every morning in the park, some things could bloom in unexpected places, their beauty all the more precious for the challenges they had overcome to exist. The cultural center was taking shape faster than anyone had anticipated. In just 2 months, the empty building had transformed into a vibrant space that seamlessly blended traditional Arabian architecture with modern amenities. Amira stood in what would soon be the cafe area, supervising the installation of the custom-designed tea counter that would be its centerpiece. The craftsman outdid himself. Karim's voice came from behind her. He had taken to visiting the site daily, often arriving early in the morning to work alongside the construction crews. Today, his kandura showed traces of paint from helping with the children's activity room. He did, Amira agreed, running her hand along the intricate woodwork. The counter told a story through its carvings, traditional patterns that morphed gradually into contemporary designs, representing the bridge between old and new that the center aimed to create. The board meeting went well, he said, moving to stand beside her. They've approved additional funding for the Artisan Scholarship program you proposed. Over the past weeks, their interactions had grown more comfortable, the weight of past deceptions lifting gradually as new truths were built. They had fallen into a rhythm of collaborative work, their shared vision for the center, providing neutral ground where they could reconnect. I visited the women's shelter yesterday, Amira said, adjusting a misaligned panel. Some of the residents are interested in the culinary training program Mama suggested. They have incredible traditional recipes passed down through generations. Like mother, like daughter, Karim smiled. Speaking of which, your mother's new dessert line at the hotel is causing quite a stir. There's a 2-week waiting list for her kunafa fusion cake. A comfortable silence fell between them as they both observed the workers installing traditional lanterns above the counter. The space was becoming exactly what Amira had always dreamed of, a place where everyone, regardless of their background, could feel at home. Do you remember, Karim began hesitantly, that morning in the park when you told me about your grandfather's old cafe in the souk? Amira nodded. She had shared that story with Omar over cups of steaming tea, describing the humble cafe where her grandfather had served workers and merchants alike, creating a community that transcended social boundaries. "I found this," he said, pulling out an old photograph. The Historical Society had it in their archives. Amira's hands trembled as she took the sepia-toned image. There was her grandfather, standing proudly in front of his small cafe, her mother as a young girl peeking out from behind him. The sign above the door read, "Beit al-Kahwa, House of Coffee." "I thought," Karim said softly, "if you approve, we could name this place Beit al-Kahwa wa ash-Shai, House of Coffee and Tea, a tribute to your family's legacy and," he hesitated, "to where our story began." Amira stared at the photograph, emotions welling up inside her. "You've been doing this all along, haven't you? Even before everything. The medical treatment, for Mama, the worker reforms, and now this. You've been trying to right old wrongs." "Not just right wrongs," he admitted. "I'm trying to build something better, something that honors the past, while embracing the future." His eyes met hers. Something real. Before she could respond, a commotion arose from the main entrance. Hassan rushed in, his usual composure slightly ruffled. "Your Highness, Sheikh Ahmad is here." Karim straightened, but didn't move away from Amira. His father entered the space, his commanding presence filling the room. Workers quickly made themselves scarce as Sheikh Ahmad surveyed the partially completed center with an unreadable expression. "So, this is where you've been spending all your time," he said finally. "I had to see for myself what could be so important that my son would choose to spend his days covered in paint, rather than attending to his social obligations." "Father," Karim began, but Sheikh Ahmad held up a hand. "The board members are talking. Karim, they say you've changed, that you're no longer fit to lead the company. Your reforms, while admirable, are cutting into our profits. And now this," he gestured around the space, "a community center, run by..." His eyes fell on Amira, recognition dawning. "Ah, I should have known this was about her." "This is about all of us," Karim said firmly, "about what kind of legacy we want to leave. Look around, Father. This center will bring people together, create opportunities, preserve our culture while embracing progress. Isn't that worth more than a few percentage points of profit?" Sheikh Ahmad's gaze traveled from the traditional archways to the modern lighting, from the carved tea counter to the state-of-the-art kitchen equipment. Finally, his eyes settled on the photograph still in Amira's hands. "May I?" he asked, his tone softening slightly. Amira handed him the picture. "I remember this cafe," he said, surprising them both. "My father used to take me there sometimes, said it was the only place in Dubai where you could hear the real pulse of the city." He looked up at Amira. "Your grandfather never treated us any differently from his other customers. That made quite an impression on a young boy who was usually surrounded by excessive deference." A small smile crossed his face as he handed the photograph back. Perhaps it's time for the Al-Rashid family to remember what that felt like." He turned to his son. "The board may not understand what you're doing here, Karim, but I'm beginning to." The tension in the room eased slightly, but Sheikh Ahmad wasn't finished. "However," he said, his expression growing serious, "if this is to be part of the Al-Rashid Group's future, it must be done properly, with full commitment from all parties involved." His gaze shifted meaningfully between Karim and Amira. The implication hung in the air as Sheikh Ahmad made his way to the exit. At the door, he paused. "Your mother's new dessert menu at the hotel," he said to Amira. "It brings back memories of how things used to taste before we started prioritizing profit over authenticity." After he left, Karim and Amira stood in stunned silence. Finally, she turned to him. "Did your father just give us his blessing?" "I think," Karim said slowly, "he gave us something more important. Understanding." Looking around the space that would soon be filled with life, laughter, and the aroma of properly brewed tea, Amira felt the last walls around her heart beginning to crumble. The man beside her was neither the simple tea vendor she had first fallen for nor the privileged sheikh she had feared him to be. He was both and something more. Something real. The morning of Beit al-Kahwa wa ash-Shai's opening dawned bright and clear. Amira arrived before sunrise, her heart racing with equal parts excitement and nervousness. The center had come together beautifully, every detail carefully, chosen to create a space that honored both tradition and progress. She found Karim already there, meticulously arranging the tea sets behind the carved counter. He had insisted on preparing the first morning's tea service himself, a gesture that touched her deeply. The past few weeks had seen them growing closer again, their shared work on the center healing old wounds and building new understanding. "Everything's ready," he said as she approached, but his voice held a note of anxiety she'd never heard before. "I hope." "It's perfect," she assured him, taking in the space they had created together. The morning light streamed through the geometric patterns of the traditional mashrabiyya windows, casting intricate shadows across the modern furnishings. The walls featured both contemporary local artists and historical photographs of old Dubai, including the picture of her grandfather's cafe in a place of honor near the entrance. Soon the first guests would arrive for the private opening ceremony, a mix of corporate leaders, community members, and local artisans who would be teaching at the center. But for now, it was just them, standing in the quiet space that represented everything they had learned from each other. "I have something for you," Karim said, suddenly reaching beneath the counter. He produced a small wooden box, its surface carved with the same patterns as the tea counter. A tradition reimagined. Amira opened the box carefully. Inside lay a delicate silver pendant, its design a perfect fusion of traditional Bedouin craftsmanship and contemporary artistry. At its center was a small desert rose carved from rose quartz. "It's not an engagement ring," he said quickly, seeing her expression. "Not yet. It's a promise to always be real with you, to never hide behind masks again." He paused, gathering his courage. "And maybe, if you're willing, it's an invitation to write the next chapter of our story together." Before she could respond, the doors opened and guests began to arrive. The next hours passed in a blur of greetings, congratulations, and countless cups of perfectly brewed tea. Amira watched with pride as visitors from all walks of life mingled freely in the space, exactly as she had always dreamed. Her mother had outdone herself with the breakfast spread, featuring both traditional favorites and innovative fusion pastries. Sheikh Ahmad himself was seen asking for seconds of her kunafa, much to everyone's amusement. The formal ceremony began with traditional Arabic coffee service, followed by speeches from community leaders and artists who would be teaching at the center. When it was Amira's turn to speak, she found herself looking directly at Karim. "This place represents more than just a bridge between old and new Dubai," she said. "It represents the truth that real connections can transcend any boundary of class, culture, or circumstance. Sometimes the simplest cup of tea can lead to the most profound understanding." As the ceremony concluded and guests began to disperse, a group of children from the local community center rushed in, their excitement palpable. They had been invited to be among the first regular visitors, and their joy at exploring the space brought smiles to everyone's faces. One little girl tugged at Amira's sleeve, pointing to the tea counter where Karim was demonstrating proper brewing techniques to an enthralled audience. "Is it true?" she whispered. "The story about the sheikh who became a tea vendor to understand his people better." Amira smiled, touching the desert rose pendant at her throat. "Yes, Habibi, sometimes people have to take extraordinary journeys to find their true selves." The girl considered this seriously. And did he find what he was looking for? Amira's eyes met Karim's across the room. He was wearing a simple white kandura today, but his sleeves were rolled up as he worked with the tea equipment, embodying both his roles with natural grace. "I think," she said softly, "we both did." Later, as the sun began to set on their first day of operations, Amira and Karim stood together on the center's small balcony, overlooking the city they both loved. The call to Maghrib prayer echoed across Dubai, mixing with the sounds of laughter and conversation from inside. "So," Karim said, carefully preparing 2 cups of tea at the small table they had set up there. "About that invitation." Amira took the cup he offered, breathing in the familiar aroma that had first brought them together. "I think," she said, slowly, "that some stories deserve a chance to be told properly from beginning to end. His eyes lit up with hope. And our story? She reached out and took his hand, feeling the calluses he had earned working alongside the center's construction crew, so different from the smooth hands of a sheikh, but so much more real. Our story is just beginning, she said softly. And this time we're writing it together, with nothing but truth between us. The desert rose pendant caught the last rays of the setting sun, its facets reflecting light like the promises of tomorrow. Below them, Dubai continued its eternal dance between tradition and progress, but here, in this space they had created together, they had found their own perfect balance. Together, Karim agreed, squeezing her hand gently. No more masks, no more walls, just us building something real. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they shared a smile that held all the warmth of 1,000 cups of tea, all the sweetness of new beginnings, and all the promise of a love that had found its way home through the most unexpected of journeys. 6 months after its opening, Beit al-Kahwa wa Ash-Shai had become more successful than anyone could have imagined. The center hummed with activity from dawn to dusk, hosting everything from traditional craft workshops to modern business meetings, all while serving the finest tea and coffee in Dubai. Amira stood at her favorite spot near the carved counter, watching the diverse crowd that filled the space. A group of elderly women taught young girls traditional embroidery techniques in one corner, while international business executives enjoyed Arabic coffee and dates in another. The scent of her mother's freshly baked pastries wafted from the kitchen, mixing with the aromatic blend of carefully brewed teas. The tourism board wants to feature us in their new cultural initiative, Hassan announced, approaching with a tablet displaying the proposal. They're calling us a model for modern Arabic hospitality. Amira smiled, remembering how far they'd come. The center had sparked a movement across Dubai, with other businesses and cultural spaces following their lead in bridging traditional values with contemporary needs. Even the skeptical board members had been won over by the project's success and positive publicity. Speaking of publicity, Hassan continued, his expression growing serious, have you seen today's Business Weekly? He handed her the magazine, where a feature article highlighted the transformation of the Al Rashid Group under Karim's leadership. The reforms he had implemented were being studied as a model for corporate responsibility in the region, but what caught Amira's eye was a small sidebar about their relationship, speculating about an imminent royal engagement. Her hand unconsciously went to the desert rose pendant she always wore. Their relationship had deepened over the months, growing stronger through shared work and honest conversations. The publicity was inevitable. She had learned to accept that aspect of being involved with one of Dubai's most prominent figures, but they had managed to keep their private life largely their own. The sound of excited chatter drew her attention to the entrance, where Karim was arriving with a group of construction workers. They had just finished inspecting the site of their next project, a vocational training center being built near the workers' housing area. He caught her eye across the room and smiled, that same genuine smile that had first won her heart over cups of tea in the park. Your mother's new dessert is causing quite a stir, he said as he joined her, gesturing to where a crowd had gathered around the display case featuring Mama's latest creation, a fusion of traditional Emirati lukemat with French pastry techniques. She's unstoppable now that she has her own test kitchen, Amira agreed. The hotel's decision to give her mother complete creative control over their dessert program had proved brilliant, with food critics and social media influencers raving about the innovative combinations of traditional and modern flavors. As they watched, Sheikh Ahmad entered the center, stopping to greet various guests with surprising warmth. The changes in him had been as remarkable as those in his son. He had become a regular visitor, often spending hours in conversation with the artisans and community members who frequented the space. The board meeting went well, Amira asked quietly, noting Karim's relaxed posture. He nodded. They've approved the expansion plan. We'll be opening similar centers in Abu Dhabi and Sharjah by next year. He paused, his expression growing thoughtful. But there's something else I wanted to discuss with you. Before he could continue, they were interrupted by the arrival of a familiar face. Saeed, looking considerably humbled since his resignation from the board. He had requested this meeting, his first time returning to any Al-Rashid property since his departure. "Your Highness," he began formally, then corrected himself. "Karim and Amira, I owe you both an apology." The silence that followed was heavy with shared history. Saeed looked around the center, taking in the successful implementation of everything he had once dismissed as foolish idealism. "I was wrong," he admitted, "about everything. The reforms, this place, both of you." He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. "I found these while clearing out my old office. They're the original documents from your mother's dismissal," he said to Amira, "including proof that I fabricated the allegations against her. I thought you should have them even though they're no longer relevant." Amira accepted the envelope, feeling the weight of past hurts finally lifting. "Thank you," she said simply. "Would you like some tea?" The surprise on his face slowly transformed into understanding. This was how healing began, with small gestures of grace, with the offering of simple hospitality even to former adversaries. As she prepared the tea with the same care she'd learned to appreciate during those mornings in the park, Amira reflected on how their story had affected not just their lives but had rippled out to touch so many others. The center had become more than just a bridge between social classes. It was a sanctuary where people could rediscover their shared humanity. Karim joined her behind the counter, naturally falling into their practiced rhythm of teamwork. As they served the tea together, she caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart skip a beat. There was something different about him today, an energy he seemed to be containing with effort. "What is it?" she asked softly, recognizing the look in his eyes, the same one he'd had when he was struggling to tell her the truth about his identity all those months ago. "Later," he promised, his smile holding a secret, "when the stars come out." Above them, the geometric patterns of the traditional windows cast ever-changing shadows across the floor, like time itself dancing between past and present, while the scent of properly brewed tea promised stories yet to be told. As evening approached, Amira wondered about Karim's mysterious behavior throughout the day. He had disappeared shortly after their interaction with Saeed, leaving her with a cryptic message to meet him at Zabil Park after closing the center. The last customers lingered over their tea, reluctant to leave the warm atmosphere that had become a second home to so many. Mama appeared from the kitchen, carrying a small box of her special date cookies, the same recipe she had once shared, with a humble tea vendor. "For your walk in the park," she said with a knowing smile, her eyes twinkling with secrets Amira couldn't quite read. The park was quiet when she arrived, the evening air cool and sweet with the scent of night blooming. Jasmine, her feet carried her automatically to the spot where the tea cart had once stood, where their story had begun. To her surprise, it was there again, the same cart, lovingly restored, with fresh desert roses arranged on its counter. "Some things come full circle," Karim's voice came from behind her. He had changed from his business clothes into the simple garments he had worn as Omar, but his bearing was entirely his own, neither sheikh nor vendor, but simply himself. "What's all this?" Amira asked, gesturing to the cart and the small table and chairs arranged beside it. "I thought we could share one more cup of tea here," he said, beginning the careful preparation she had watched so many times before. "Where we first learned to see each other truly." As he worked, Amira noticed small changes in the park around them. Tiny lights twinkled in the trees, and soft music drifted on the breeze, the same Bedouin love song she had once hummed while grading papers at his cart. "You remembered," she whispered. "I remember everything about those mornings," he replied, pouring the tea with the same grace that had first made her suspect there was more to the humble vendor than met the eye. "Every smile, every conversation, every moment I fell deeper in love with you." He handed her a cup, their fingers brushing in a way that still sent shivers through her after all this time. As she raised it to her lips, something in the bottom of the cup caught her eye. A ring, traditional in design but with modern elements woven through it, centered with a desert rose carved from a rare pink diamond. Her breath caught as Karim took the cup gently from her trembling hands. "The last time I tried to give you my heart, I did it while wearing a mask," he said softly, retrieving the ring. "This time I stand before you as I am, A man who learned the true meaning of wealth from a kind stranger, who offered dates to a tea vendor, who discovered the value of authenticity from a teacher who saw beyond appearances, who found his purpose through loving someone brave enough to demand truth. He knelt before her, holding up the ring. Amira, you once inspired a sheikh to become a tea vendor to find love. Now I'm asking you, as myself, all of myself, to share a life of blending worlds together. Will you marry me? Tears blurred her vision as memories cascaded through her mind. Their first meeting, their shared dreams, the pain of betrayal, the joy of reconciliation, and all the cups of tea that had marked their journey. Looking into his eyes, she saw both the man she had fallen in love with in the park and the man she had grown to love even more deeply through their shared vision of bridging divides. On one condition, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Anything. Promise me we'll never stop serving tea together. His laugh was pure joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. I promise. In fact, he gestured behind her, where she turned to see their families emerging from the shadows, her mother, Sheikh Ahmad, Hassan, Fatima, and others who had been part of their story. Your mother helped design the ring, he admitted, and the celebrations at the center tomorrow. They're not just for our 6-month anniversary. You were that confident of my answer, she teased, even as she pulled him to his feet and into her arms. No, he said honestly, but I was that hopeful. You taught me that hope, combined with truth and dedication, can bridge any divide. Their loved ones surrounded them with congratulations and blessings. Amira looked around the park that had started their journey. The tea cart stood witness to their new beginning, its simple presence a reminder that the grandest love stories can start with the smallest gestures of kindness. Later, as they all gathered around the cart for a celebratory cup of tea, Sheikh Ahmad raised his cup in a toast. To my son who became a better man by pretending to be a simpler one, and to the woman who taught him, and all of us, that true nobility lies not in titles but in actions. To tea and truth, Karim added, his eyes never leaving Amira's face. To love without masks, she finished, squeezing his hand. Above them, the stars sparkled like diamonds scattered across velvet, witnesses to a story that had begun with deception, but had bloomed into something rare and precious, like a desert rose growing through concrete, proof that beauty can flourish in the most unexpected places when nurtured with honesty and love. And if anyone passing through Zabil Park early in the morning happens to see a sheikh and his wife sharing a quiet cup of tea at an old cart, they might just catch a glimpse of the truth that Amira and Karim discovered, that the greatest journeys of the heart often begin with something as simple as a properly brewed cup of tea, served with sincerity and accepted with grace.